The Complete Tales of Winnie the Pooh. Chapter 1. Here is Edward Bear, coming downstairs now, bump, 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 on the back of his head, behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way, if only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels that perhaps there isn't. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom and ready to be introduced to you. Winnie the Pooh. When I first heard his name, I said, just as you're going to say, but I thought he was a boy. So did I, said Christopher Robin. Then you can't call him Winnie? I don't. But you said, he's Winnie the Pooh. Don't you know what "the" means? Ah, yes, of course I do, I said quickly. And I hope you do too, because it's all the explanation you're going to get. Sometimes Winnie the Pooh likes a game of some sort when he comes downstairs, and sometimes he likes to sit quietly in front of the fire and listen to a story. This evening, what about a story? Said Christopher Robin. What about a story? I said. Could you very sweetly tell Winnie the Pooh one? I suppose I could, I said. What sort of stories does he like? About himself, because he's that sort of bear. Oh, I see. So could you, very sweetly? I'll try, I said. So I tried. Once upon a time, a very long time ago now, about last Friday, Winnie the Pooh lived in a forest all by himself, under the name of Sanders. What does under the name mean? Asked Christopher Robin. It means he had the name over the door in gold letters and lived under it. Winnie the Pooh wasn't quite sure, said Christopher Robin. Now I am, said a growly voice. Then I'll go on, said I. One day when he was out walking, he came to an open place in the middle of the forest. And in the middle of this place was a large oak tree, and from the top of that tree there came a loud buzzing noise. Winnie the Pooh sat down at the foot of the tree, put his head between his paws, and began to think. First of all, he said to himself, that buzzing noise means something. You don't get a buzzing noise like that, just buzzing and buzzing, without it meaning something. If there's a buzzing noise, somebody's making a buzzing noise, and the only reason for making a buzzing noise that I know of is because you're a bee. Then he thought another long time and said, and the only reason for being a bee that I can think of is making honey. And then he got up and said, and the only reason for making honey is so I can eat it. And he began to climb the tree. He climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed, and he sang a little song to himself. It went something like this. Isn't it funny how a bear likes honey? Buzz, 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 I wonder what he does. Then he climbed a little further and a little further, and then just a little further. By that time he had thought up another song. It's a very funny thought that if bears were bees, they'd build their nests at the bottom of trees. And that being so, if the bees were bears, we shouldn't have to climb up all these stairs. He was getting rather tired by this time, so that is why he sang a complaining song. He was nearly there now, and if he just stood on that branch... Crack! Oh, help, said Pooh, as he dropped 10 feet on the branch below him. If only I hadn't, he said as he bounced 20 feet on the next branch. You see what I meant to do, he explained, as he turned head over heels and crashed onto another branch 30 feet below. What I meant to do, of course it was, he admitted, as he slithered very quickly through the next 6 branches. It all comes, I suppose, he decided, as he said goodbye to the last branch, spun round 3 times, and flew gracefully into a gorse bush. It all comes of liking honey so much. Oh, help! He crawled out of the gorse bush, brushed the prickles from his nose and began to think again. And the first person he thought of was Christopher Robin. "Is that me?" said Christopher Robin in an odd voice, hardly daring to believe it. "That was you." Christopher Robin said nothing, but his eyes got larger and larger, and his face got pinker and pinker. So Winnie the Pooh went round to his friend Christopher Robin, who lived behind a green door in another part of the forest. "Good morning, Christopher Robin," he said. "Good morning, Winnie the Pooh," said you. "I wonder if you've got such a thing as a balloon about you." "A balloon?" "Yes, I just said it to myself coming along the way. I wonder if Christopher Robin has such a thing as a balloon about him. I just said it to myself, thinking of balloons and wondering." "What do you want a balloon for?" said Christopher Robin. Winnie the Pooh looked around to see if anybody was listening. Then he put his paw to his mouth and said in a deep whisper, "Honey." "But you don't get honey with balloons." "I do," said Pooh. Well, it just happens that he had been to a party the day before at the house of his friend Piglet, and he had balloons at the party. Christopher Robin had a great big green balloon, and one of Rabbit's relations had a big blue one and had left it behind, being really too young to go to a party at all, and so you had brought the green one and the blue one home with you. "Which one would you like?" Christopher Robin asked Pooh. He put his head between his paws and thought very carefully. "It's like this," said Pooh. "When you go after honey with a balloon, the great thing is not to let the bees know you're coming. Now, if you have a green balloon, they might think you were only part of the tree and not notice you. And if you have a blue balloon, they might think you were only part of the sky and not notice you. And the question is, what is most likely?" "Wouldn't they notice you underneath the balloon?" asked Christopher Robin. "They might, or they might not," said Winnie the Pooh. "You never can tell with bees." He thought for a moment and said, "I shall try to look like a small black rain cloud. That will deceive them." "Then you'd better have the blue balloon," said Christopher Robin, and so it was decided. Well, they both went out with the blue balloon, and Pooh took his gun with him. And Winnie the Pooh went to a very muddy place they knew of, and rolled until he was black all over, and then, when the balloon was blown up as big as Pooh, and they were both holding onto the string, Christopher Robin let go suddenly, and Pooh Bear floated gracefully up into the sky and stayed there, level with the top of the tree, and about 20 feet away from it. "Hooray!" shouted Christopher Robin. "Isn't that fine?" shouted Winnie the Pooh down. "What do I look like?" "You look like a bear holding onto a balloon," said Christopher Robin. "No," said Pooh anxiously. "Not like a small black cloud in a blue sky?" "Not very much." "Oh well, perhaps from up here it looks different. As I say, you can never tell with bees." There was no wind to blow him nearer to the tree, so he stayed. He could see the honey, he could smell the honey, but he couldn't quite reach the honey. After a little while, Pooh called down, "Christopher Robin," he said in a very loud whisper. "Hello? I think the bees suspect something." "What sort of thing?" "I don't know, but something tells me that they're suspicious." "Perhaps they think you're after their honey." "It may be that. You never can tell with bees." There was another little silence, and then he called down to Christopher Robin again. "Christopher Robin?" "Yes." "Have you an umbrella in your house?" "I think so." "I wish you would bring it out here and walk up and down with it and look up every now and then and just say, 'Tut, tut, it looks like rain.' I think if you did that, it would help the deception which we're practicing on these bees." Well, Christopher Robin laughed to himself. Silly old bear. But he didn't say it aloud because he was so fond of Pooh, and he went home for his umbrella. "Oh, there you are," called Winnie the Pooh as soon as Christopher Robin got back. I was beginning to get anxious. I've discovered that the bees are definitely suspicious now. Shall I put my umbrella up? Christopher Robin asked. Yes, but wait a moment. We must be practical. The important bee to deceive is the queen bee. Can you see what is the queen bee from down there? No. A pity. Well, now, if you walk up and down with your umbrella saying, "Tut tut, it looks like rain," I shall do what I can do by singing a little cloud song, such as a cloud might sing. Go. So while Christopher Robin walked up and down and wondered if it would rain, Winnie the Pooh sang this song. How sweet to be a cloud floating in the blue. Every little cloud always sings aloud. How sweet to be a cloud floating in the blue. It makes him very proud to be a little cloud. The bees were still buzzing as suspiciously as ever. Some of them, indeed, left their nest and flew all round the cloud as it began the second verse of the song. And one bee sat at the nose of the cloud for a moment, then got up again. Christopher, ow, Robin, called out the cloud. Yes? I've been thinking, and I've come to a very important decision. These are the wrong sort of bees. Are they? Quite the wrong sort. So I think that they would make the wrong sort of honey, shouldn't you? Would they? Yes. So I think I shall come down. How? Winnie the Pooh hadn't thought of this. So he let go of the string. He would fall, bump. He didn't like that idea. So he thought for a long time and said, Christopher Robin, you must shoot the balloon with your gun. Do you have your gun? Of course I have, said Christopher Robin. But if I do that, it'll spoil the balloon, you said. But if you don't, said Pooh, I shall have to let go, and that would spoil me. When you put it like this, I suppose, said Christopher Robin, and he aimed very carefully at the balloon and fired. Ow, said Pooh. Did I miss? Christopher Robin asked. You didn't exactly miss, said Pooh, but you did miss the balloon. I'm so sorry, Christopher Robin said, and he fired again, and this time he hit the balloon, and the air slowly came out, and Winnie the Pooh floated down to the ground. But his arms were so stiff from holding onto the string of the balloon all that time that they stayed up straight in the air for more than a week. And whenever a fly came and settled on his nose, he had to blow it off. And I think, but I'm not sure, that is why he was always called Pooh. Is that the end of the story? Asked Christopher Robin. That's the end of that one. There are others. How about Pooh and me? Asked Christopher Robin. And Piglet and Rabbit and all of you. Don't you remember? I do remember, and then when I try to remember, I forget. That day when Pooh and Piglet tried to catch the heffalump, they didn't catch it, did they? No. Pooh couldn't, because he hasn't any brain. Did I catch it? Asked Christopher Robin. Well, that comes into the story. Christopher Robin nodded. I do remember, he said, only Pooh doesn't very well, so that's why he likes having it told to him again. But then it's a real story and not just a remembering. That's just how I feel, I said. Christopher Robin gave a deep sigh, picking his bear up by the leg, and walked off to the door, trailing Pooh behind him. At the door, he turned and said, Coming to see me have my bath? I might, I said. I didn't hurt him when I shot him, did I? Not a bit. He nodded and went out, and in a moment, I heard Winnie the Pooh bump, 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 going up the stairs behind him. Chapter 2. Pooh goes visiting and gets into a tight place. Edward Bear, known to his friends as Winnie the Pooh, or just Pooh for short, was walking through the forest one day, humming proudly to himself. He had made up a little hum that morning as he was doing his stoutness exercises in front of the glass. Tra-la-la-la, he said as he stretched up as high as he could go, and then tra-la-la-la, oh, help, la, as he tried to reach his toes. After breakfast, he had said it over and over to himself until he had learnt it off by heart, and now he was humming it right through properly. It went like this. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la, rum-tum, tiddle-um-tum, tiddle-little, tiddle-iddle, 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 rum-tum-tum, tiddle-um. Well, he was humming this hum to himself and walking along gaily, wondering what everyone else was doing and what it felt like being someone else, when suddenly he came to a sandy bank, and in the bank was a large hole. Aha, said Pooh, rum-tum, tiddle-um-tum. If I know anything about anything, that hole means rabbit, he said. And rabbit means company, he said. And company means food, and listening to me humming, and such. Rum-tum-tum, tiddle-tum. So he bent down, put his head into the hole, and called out, Is anybody home? There was a sudden scuffling noise from inside the hole, and then silence. What I said was, Is anybody home? Called out Pooh very loudly. No, said a voice, and then added, You needn't shout so loud. I heard you quite well the first time. Bother, said Pooh. Isn't there anybody here at all? Nobody. Winnie the Pooh shook his head out of the hole and thought for a little, and thought to himself, There must be somebody there, because somebody must have said nobody. So he put his head back in the hole and said, Hello, Rabbit? Isn't that you? No, said Rabbit, in a different sort of voice this time. But isn't that Rabbit's voice? I don't think so, said Rabbit. It isn't meant to be. Oh, said Pooh. He shook his head out of the hole and had another think, and then put it back in and said, Well, could you kindly tell me where Rabbit is? He's gone to see his friend Pooh Bear, who is a great friend of his. But this is me, said Bear, very much surprised. What sort of me? Pooh Bear. Are you sure? Said Rabbit, still more surprised. Quite sure, said Pooh. Oh, well, then come in, said Rabbit. So Pooh pushed and pushed and pushed his way through the hole, and at last he got in. You were quite right, said Rabbit, looking at him all over. It is you. Glad to see you. Who did you think it was? Well, I wasn't sure. You know how it is in the forest. You can't have anybody coming into one's house. One has to be careful. How about a mouthful of something? Pooh always liked a little something at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was very glad to see Rabbit getting out the plates and mugs. And when Rabbit said, Honey or condensed milk with your bread, he was so excited that he said, Both! And then, so as to not seem greedy, he added, But don't bother about the bread, please. And for a long time after that he had nothing, until at last, humming to himself in a rather sticky voice, he got up, shook Rabbit lovingly by the paw, and said that he must be going. Must you? Said Rabbit politely. Well, said Pooh, I could stay a little longer if you... And he tried very hard to look in the direction of the larder. As a matter of fact, said Rabbit, I was going out myself directly. Oh, well then, I'll be going on. Goodbye. Well, goodbye, if you won't have any more. Is there any more? Asked Pooh quickly. Rabbit took the covers off the dishes and said, Nope, there wasn't. I thought not, said Pooh, nodding to himself. Well, goodbye. I must be going. So he started to climb out of the hole. He pulled with his front paws and pushed back with his back paws, and in a little while his nose was out in the open again, and then his ears, and then his front paws, and then his shoulders, and then... Oh, help, said Pooh. I'd better go back in. Oh, bother, said Pooh. I shall have to go on. I can't do either, said Pooh. Oh, help, and bother. Now by this time, Rabbit wanted to go for a walk too, and finding the front door full, He went out by the back door and came round to Pooh and looked at him. "Hello, are you stuck?" he asked. No, said Pooh carelessly. "Just resting and thinking and humming to myself." "Here, give us a paw." Pooh Bear stretched out a paw, and Rabbit pulled and pulled and pulled. "Ow!" cried Pooh. "You're hurting." "The fact is," said Rabbit, "you are stuck." "It all comes," said Pooh quite crossly, "of not having front doors big enough." "It all comes," cried Rabbit sternly, "of eating too much." "I thought at the time," said Rabbit, "only I didn't like to say anything, that one of us was eating too much, and I knew it wasn't me. Well, I shall go and fetch Christopher Robin." Christopher Robin lived at the other end of the forest, and when he came back with Rabbit, he saw the front half of Pooh, and he said, "Silly old bear," and said it in such a loving voice that everyone felt quite hopeful again. "I was just beginning to think," said Winnie the Pooh, sniffing slightly, "that Rabbit might never be able to use his front door again, and I should hate that," he added. "So should I," said Rabbit. "Use his front door again," said Christopher Robin. "Of course he'll use his front door again." "Good," said Rabbit. "If we can't pull you out, Pooh, we might have to push you back." Rabbit scratched his whiskers thoughtfully and pointed out that once Pooh was pushed back, he was back. And of course, nobody was more glad than Pooh to see that he was still there, and it was... some lived in trees and some lived underground, and... "You mean I'd never get out?" said Pooh. "I mean," said Rabbit, "that having got so far, it seems a pity to waste it." Christopher Robin nodded. "Then there's only one thing to be done," he said. "We shall have to wait for you to get thin again." "How long does getting thin take?" asked Pooh anxiously. "About a week, I should think." "But I can't stay here for a week." "You can stay here all right, silly old bear. It's getting you out which is so difficult." "We'll read to you," said Rabbit cheerfully, "and I hope it won't snow," he added. "And I say, old fellow, you're taking up a good deal of room in my house. Do you mind if I use your back legs as a towel horse? Because, they are doing nothing, and it would be very convenient just to hang the towels on them." "A week," said Pooh gloomily. "What about meals?" "I'm afraid no meals," said Christopher Robin, "because of getting thinner, but we will read to you." Winnie the Pooh began to sigh, and then found he couldn't, because he was so tightly stuck, and a tear rolled down his eye as he said, "Then would you read a sustaining book, such as would help and comfort a wedged bear in great tightness?" So for a week, Christopher Robin read that sort of book at the north end of Pooh, and Rabbit hung his washing on the south end, and in between, Winnie the Pooh felt himself getting slenderer and slenderer, and at the end of the week, Christopher Robin said, "Now!" So he took hold of Pooh's front paws, and Rabbit took hold of Christopher Robin, and all Rabbit's friends and relations took hold of Rabbit, and they all pulled together, and for a long time Pooh only said, "Ow!" and "Oh!" and then all of a sudden he said, "Pop!" just as if a cork were coming out of a bottle. And Christopher Robin and Rabbit and all Rabbit's friends and relations went head over heels backwards, and on the top of them came Winnie the Pooh, free. So with a nod of thanks to his friends, he went on with his walk through the forest, humming proudly to himself. But Christopher Robin looked after him lovingly, and said to himself, "Silly old bear." Chapter 3. Pooh and Piglet Go Hunting and Nearly Catch a Woozle. Piglet lived in a very grand house in the middle of a beech tree, and the beech tree was in the middle of the forest, and Piglet lived in the middle of the house. Next to his house was a piece of broken board which had "Trespassers W" on it. When Christopher Robin asked Piglet what it meant, he said it was his grandfather's name, and had been in the family for a long time. Christopher Robin said you couldn't be called Trespassers W, and Piglet said yes you could, because his grandfather was, and it was short for Trespasser's Will, which was short for Trespasser's William, and his grandfather had 2 names in case he lost one, Trespassers after an uncle, and William after Trespassers. I've got 2 names, said Christopher Robin carelessly. Well, there you are. It proves it, said Piglet. One fine winter's day, when Piglet was brushing away the snow in front of his house, he happened to look up, and there was Winnie the Pooh. Pooh was walking round and round in a circle, thinking of something else, when Piglet called to him, and he just went on walking. Hello, said Piglet. What are you doing? Hunting, said Pooh. Hunting what? Tracking something, said Winnie the Pooh, very mysteriously. Tracking what? Asked Piglet, coming closer. That's just what I ask myself. I ask myself, what? What do you think you'll answer? I shall have to wait until I catch up with it, said Winnie the Pooh. Now look here, he said, and he pointed to the ground in front of him. What do you see there? Tracks, said Piglet. Paw marks. He gave a little squeak of excitement. Oh, Pooh, do you think it's a woozle? It may be, said Pooh. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. You never can tell with paw marks. With few words, he went on tracking, and Piglet, after watching him for a minute or 2, ran after him. Winnie the Pooh had come to a sudden stop and was bending over the tracks in a puzzled sort of way. What's the matter? Asked Piglet. It's a very funny thing, said Bear. But there seem to be 2 animals now. This, whatever it was, has been joined by another, whatever it is, and the 2 of them are now proceeding in company. Would you mind coming with me, Piglet, in case there turn out to be hostile animals? Piglet scratched his ear in a nice sort of way, and said that he had nothing to do until Friday and would be delighted to come, in case it really was a woozle. You mean, in case it really is 2 woozles, said Winnie the Pooh, and Piglet said that anyhow he had nothing to do until Friday. So off they went together. There was a small, spiny sort of larch trees just there, and it seemed as if the 2 woozles, if that's what they were, had been going around this spiny. So round this spiny went Pooh and Piglet after them, Pooh passing the time by telling Piglet what his grandfather, Trespassers W, had done to remove stiffness after tracking, and how his grandfather, Trespassers W, had suffered in his later years from shortness of breath, and other matters of interest. And Pooh, wondering what a grandfather was like, and if perhaps this was 2 grandfathers they were after now, and if so, whether he would be allowed to take one home and keep it, and what Christopher Robin would say, and still the tracks went on in front of them. Suddenly, Winnie the Pooh stopped and pointed excitedly at him. Look! What? Said Piglet with a jump, and then, to show that he had been frightened, he jumped up or down, once or twice, in an exercising sort of way. The tracks, said Pooh. A 3rd animal has joined the other 2. Pooh? Cried Piglet. Do you think it's another woozle? No, said Pooh, because it makes different marks. It's either 2 woozles, and 1 as it might be woozle, or 2 as it might be wizzles, and 1, if so it is, woozle. Let us continue to follow them. So they went on, feeling just a little anxious now, in case the 3 animals in front of them were of hostile intent. And Piglet wished very much that his grandfather, T.W., were there, instead of elsewhere, and Pooh thought how nice it would be if they met Christopher Robin suddenly, but quite accidentally, and only because he liked Christopher Robin so much. And then, all of a sudden, Winnie the Pooh stopped again, and licked the tip of his nose in a cooling manner, for he was feeling more hot and anxious than ever he had in his life before. There were 4 animals in front of them. Do you see, Piglet? Look at their tracks. there, as it were, woozles, and one, as it were, whizzle, another woozle has joined them. And so it seemed to be. There were the tracks, crossing over each other, getting muddled up with each other there, but quite plainly every now and then the tracks of 4 sets of paws. "I think," said Piglet, when he had licked the tip of his nose too, and found that it brought very little comfort, "I think I have just remembered something. I've just remembered something that I forgot to do yesterday, and I shan't be able to do it tomorrow, so I suppose I really ought to go back and do it now." "We'll do it this afternoon, and I'll come with you," said Pooh. "It isn't the sort of thing you can do in the afternoon," said Piglet quickly. "It's a very particular morning thing that has to be done in the morning, and if possible between the hours of— what would you say the time was?" "About 12, said Pooh, looking at the sun. "Between, I was saying, the hours of 12 and 12:05. So really, dear old Pooh, if you'll excuse me—" "What's that?" Pooh looked up at the sky, and then he heard the whistle again. He looked up into the branches of a big oak tree, and he saw a friend of his. "It's Christopher Robin," he said. "Ah, then you'll be all right," said Piglet. "You'll be quite safe with him. Goodbye." And he trotted home as quickly as he could, very glad to be out of all danger again. Christopher Robin came slowly down the tree. "Silly old bear," he said. "What were you doing? First you went round this spinney twice by yourself, and then Piglet ran after you, and you went round again together, and you were just going around a 4th time. Wait a moment," said Winnie the Pooh, holding up his paw. He sat down and thought, in the most thoughtful way he could think. Then he fitted his paw into one of the tracks, and then he scratched his nose twice and stood up. "Yes," said Winnie the Pooh, "I see now. I have been foolish and deluded," he said, "and I am a bear of no brain at all." "You're the best bear in all the world," said Christopher Robin soothingly. "Am I?" said Pooh hopefully, and then he brightened up suddenly. "Anyhow," he said, "it's nearly luncheon time." So he went home for it. Chapter 4. Eeyore loses a tail, and Pooh finds one. The old grey donkey Eeyore stood by himself in a thistly corner of the forest, his front feet well apart, his head on one side, and he thought about things. Sometimes he thought sadly to himself, "Why?" And sometimes he thought, "Wherefore?" And sometimes he thought, "Inasmuch as which?" And sometimes he didn't quite know what he was thinking about. So when Winnie the Pooh came stumping along, Eeyore was very glad to be able to stop thinking for a little bit in order to say, "How do you do?" in a gloomy manner to him. "And how are you?" said Winnie the Pooh. Eeyore shook his head from side to side. "Not very how," he said. "I don't seem to have felt at all how for a long time." "Dear, dear," said Pooh, "I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at you." So Eeyore stood there, gazing sadly at the ground, and Winnie the Pooh walked all around him once. "Why, what's happened to your tail?" he said in surprise. "What has happened to it?" said Eeyore. "It isn't there." "Are you sure?" "Well, either a tail is there or it isn't. You can't make a mistake about it, and yours isn't there." "Then what is?" "Nothing." "Let's have a look," said Eeyore, and he turned slowly around to the place where his tail had been a little while ago, and then, finding that he couldn't catch it up, he turned around the other way, until he came back to where he was at first, and then he put his head down and looked between his front legs, and at last he said with a long, sad sigh, "I believe you're right." "Of course I'm right," said Pooh. "That accounts for a good deal," said Eeyore gloomily. "It explains everything. No wonder." "You must have left it somewhere," said Winnie the Pooh. Somebody must have taken it, said Eeyore. How like them, he added after a long silence. Pooh felt that he ought to say something helpful about it, but didn't quite know what, so he decided to do something helpful instead. Eeyore, he said solemnly, I, Winnie the Pooh, will find your tail for you. Thank you, Pooh, answered Eeyore. You are a real friend, he said. Not like some. So Winnie the Pooh went off to find Eeyore's tail. It was a fine spring morning in the forest as he started out. Little soft clouds played happily in a blue sky, skipping out from time to time in front of the sun as if they had come to put it out, and then sliding away suddenly so that they mightn't have the next turn. Through them and between them the sun shone bravely, and a corpse which had worn its furs all the year round seemed old and dowdy now beside the new green lace which the breeches had put on so prettily, though copse and spiny matched. Through copse and spiny marched Bear, down open slopes of gorse and heather, over rocky beds of streams, up steep banks of sandstone, into the heather again, and so at last, tired and hungry, to the 100-acre wood. For it was in the 100-acre wood that Owl lived. And if anyone knows anything about anything, said Bear to himself, it's Owl who knows about something, he said, or my name's not Winnie the Pooh, he said, which it is, he added, so there you are. Owl lived at the Chestnuts, an old world resident of some great charm, which was grander than anybody else's, it seemed, because it had both a knocker and a bell pull. Underneath the knocker there was a notice which said, Please ring if answer is required. Underneath the bell pull there was a notice which said, Please knock if an answer is not required. These notices had been written by Christopher Robin, who was the only one in the forest who could spell, for Owl, though he was wise in many ways, was only able to read and write it and spell his own name. Winnie the Pooh read the two notices very carefully, first from left to right, and afterwards, in case he had missed some of it, from right to left. Then, to make sure, he knocked and pulled the knocker, and he pulled and knocked the bell rope, and he called it out in a very loud voice. Owl, I require an answer. It's Bear speaking, he said, and the door opened, and Owl looked out. Hello, Pooh, he said. How's things? Terrible and sad, said Pooh, because Eeyore, who's a friend of mine, has lost his tail, and he's moping about it. So, could you very kindly tell me how to find it for him? Well, said Owl, the customary procedure in such cases is as follows. What does crustimony proscake mean? Said Pooh, for I am a bear of very little brain, and long words bother me. It means the thing to do. As long as it means that, I don't mind, said Pooh humbly. The thing to do is as follows. First, issue a reward. Then, just a moment, said Pooh, holding up his paw. What do you mean to do this? What you were saying. You sneezed as you were going to tell me. I didn't sneeze. Yes, you did, Owl. Excuse me, Pooh. I didn't. You can't sneeze without knowing it. Well, you can't know without something having been sneezed. What I said was, first, issue a reward. You're doing it again, said Pooh sadly. A reward, said Owl very loudly. We write a notice to say that we will give a very large something to anybody who finds Eeyore's tail. I see, said Pooh, nodding his head. Talking about large somethings, he went on dreamily. I generally have a small something about now, about this time in the morning. And he looked wistfully at the cupboard in the corner of Owl's parlor. Just a mouthful of condensed milk or whatnot, with perhaps a lick of honey." "Well then," said Owl, "we write out this notice, and we put it up all over the forest." "A lick of honey," murmured Bear to himself, or not, as the case may be. And he gave a deep sigh and tried very hard to listen to what Owl was saying. But Owl went on and on, using longer and longer words, until at last he came back to where he started, and he explained that the person to write out this notice was Christopher Robin. "It was he who wrote the ones on my front door for me. Did you see them, Pooh?" For some time now, Pooh had been saying yes and no in turn, with his eyes shut to all that Owl was saying, and having said yes last time, he said, "No, not at all," now, without really knowing what Owl was talking about. "Didn't you see them?" said Owl, a little surprised. "Come and look at them now." So they went outside, and Pooh looked at the knocker and the notice below it, and he looked at the bell rope and the notice below it, and the more he looked at the bell rope, the more he felt he had seen something like it before, somewhere else, sometime before. "Handsome bell rope, isn't it?" said Owl. Pooh nodded. "It reminds me of something," he said, "but I can't think what. Where did you get it?" "I just came across it in the forest. It was hanging over a bush, and I thought at first somebody lived there, and so I rang it, and nothing happened. And I rang it again, very loudly, and it came off in my hand, and as nobody seemed to want it, I took it home, and—" "Owl," Pooh said solemnly, "you made a mistake. Somebody did want it." "Who?" "Eeyore, my dear friend Eeyore. He was fond of it." "Fond of it?" "Attached to it," said Winnie the Pooh sadly. With these words, he unhooked it and carried it back to Eeyore, and when Christopher Robin had nailed it on its right place again, Eeyore was very pleased. Eeyore frisked about the forest, waving his tail so happily that Winnie the Pooh came over all funny and had to hurry home for a little snack of something to sustain him. And wiping his mouth half an hour afterwards, he sang to himself proudly, "Who found the tail? I," said Pooh, "at 1:45, only it was 11:15 really. I found the tail." Chapter 5. Piglet Meets a Heffalump. One day, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet were all talking together, Christopher Robin finished the mouthful he was eating and said carelessly, "I saw a heffalump today, Piglet." "What was it doing?" asked Piglet. "Just lumping along," said Christopher Robin. "I don't think it saw me." "I saw one once," said Piglet. "At least I think I did," he said. "Only perhaps it wasn't." "So did I," said Pooh, wondering what a heffalump was like. "You don't often see them," said Christopher Robin carelessly. "Not now," said Piglet. "Not at this time of year," said Pooh. Then they all talked about something else until it was time for Pooh and Piglet to go home together. At first they stumped along the path with edge to the 100-acre wood. They didn't say much to each other, but then they came to the stream and had helped each other across the stepping stones and were able to walk side by side over the heather, and they began to talk in a friendly way about this and that. And Piglet said, "If you see what I mean, Pooh." And Pooh said, "It's just what I think myself, Piglet." And Piglet said, "But on the other hand, Pooh, we must remember." And Pooh said, "Quite true, Piglet," although I had forgotten it in a moment. And then, just as they came to the 6 pine trees, Pooh looked around to see that nobody else was listening, and said in a very solemn voice, "Piglet, I've decided something." "What have you decided, Pooh?" "I have decided to catch a heffalump." Pooh nodded his head several times as he said this, and waited for Piglet to say how, or Pooh, you couldn't, or something helpful of that sort, but Piglet said nothing. The fact was, Piglet was wishing that he had thought about it first. I shall do it, said Pooh, after waiting a little longer, by means of a trap, and it must be a cunning trap, so you'll have to help me, Piglet. Pooh, said Piglet, feeling quite happy again now, I will. And then he said, how shall we do it? And Pooh said, that's just it. How? And then they sat together to think it out. Pooh's first idea was that they should dig a very deep pit, and then the heffalump would come along and fall into the pit, and why? Said Piglet. Why what? Said Pooh. Why would he fall in? Pooh rubbed his nose with his paw and said that Heffalump might be walking along, humming a little song and looking up at the sky, wondering if it would rain, and so he wouldn't see the very deep pit until he was halfway down, and then it would be too late. Piglet said this was a very good trap, but supposing it were raining already? Pooh rubbed his nose again and said he hadn't thought of that, and then he brightened up and said that if it were raining already, the Heffalump would be looking at the sky, wondering if it would clear up, he said, so he wouldn't see the very deep pit until he was halfway down, and then it would be too late. Piglet said, now that this point had been explained, he thought it was a very cunning trap. Pooh was very proud when he heard this, and he felt the Huffalump was as good as caught already. But there was just one other thing which had to be thought about, and it was this. Where should they dig the very deep pit? Piglet said the best place would be somewhere near a Heffalump, just before he fell into it, only about a foot further on. But then he would see us digging, said Pooh. Not if he were looking at the sky. He would suspect, said Pooh, and if he happened to look down. He thought for a long time and then added sadly, it isn't as easy as I thought. I suppose that's why Heffalumps never get caught. That must be it, said Piglet. They sighed and got up, and when they had taken a few gorse prickles out of themselves, they sat down again. And all the time, Pooh was saying to himself, if only I could think of something. For he felt sure that a very clever brain could catch a Heffalump, if only he knew the right way to go about it. Suppose, he said to Piglet, you wanted to catch me. How would you do it? Well, said Piglet, I should do it like this. I should make a trap, and I should put a jar of honey in the trap, and you would smell it, and you would go after it, and I would go in after it, said Pooh excitedly, only very carefully so as not to hurt myself. And I would get to the jar of honey, and I should lick round the edges first of all, pretending that there wasn't any more, and then I should walk away, and think about it a little, and then I should come back and start licking in the middle of the jar, and then, yes, well, never mind about that, there you would be, and there I should catch you. Now the first thing to think of is, what do Heffalumps like? I should think acorns, shouldn't you? We'll get a lot of... I say, wake up, Pooh. Pooh, who had gone into a very happy dream, woke up with a start, and said that honey was a much more trappy thing than acorns. Piglet didn't think so, and they were just going to argue about it, when Piglet remembered that if they put acorns in the trap, he would have to find the acorns, but if they put honey, then Pooh would have to give up some of his own honey. So he said, all right, honey then. Just as Pooh remembered it too, and he was going to say, all right, acorns. Honey, said Piglet to himself in a thoughtful way, as if it were now settled. I'll dig the pit while you go and get the honey. Very well, said Pooh, and he stumped off. As soon as he got home, he went to the larder, and he stood on a chair and took down a very large jar of honey from the top shelf. It had honey written on it, but just to make sure, he took off the paper cover and looked at it, and it looked just like honey. But you never can tell, said Pooh, I remember my uncle saying once that he had cheese just this color. So he put his tongue in it and took a large lick. Yes, he said, it is. No doubt about that. And honey, I should say, right down to the bottom of the jar. Unless, of course, he said, somebody put cheese in at the bottom for a joke. Perhaps I'd better go further, just in case heffalumps don't like cheese, same as me. Ah, and he gave a deep sigh. I was right. It is honey right the way down. Having made certain of this, he took the jar back to Piglet, and Piglet looked up from the bottom of his very deep pit. Got it? Said Pooh. Yes, but it isn't a quite full jar, and he threw it down to Piglet, and Piglet said, No, it isn't. Is that all you've got left? And Pooh said, Yes, because it was. So Piglet put the jar at the bottom of the pit and climbed out, and they went off home together. Well, good night, Pooh, said Piglet when they got to Pooh's house. And we meet at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning by the pine trees and see how many heffalumps we've caught in our trap. 6 o'clock, Piglet. And have you got any string? No. Why do you want string? To lead them home with. Oh. I think heffalumps come if you whistle. Some do and some don't. You never can tell with heffalumps. Well, good night. Good night. And off Piglet trotted to his house, Trespassers W, while Pooh made his preparations for bed. Some hours later, just as the night was beginning to steal away, Pooh woke up suddenly with a sinking feeling. He had that sinking feeling before, and he knew what it meant. He was hungry. So he went to the larder, and he stood on a chair, and reached up to the top shelf, and found nothing. That's funny, he thought. I know I had a jar full of honey in there. A full jar full of honey right up to the top. And it had honey written on it, so that I should know it was honey. That's very funny. And then he began to wander up and down, wondering where it was and murmuring a murmur to himself, just like this. It's very, very funny, 'cause I know I had some honey, 'cause it had a label on saying honey. A galoptuous full of pot too, and I don't know where it's got to. Now I don't know where it's gone. Well, it's funny. He had murmured this to himself 3 times in a singing sort of way, when suddenly he remembered he had put it into the cunning trap to catch the heffalump. Bother, said Pooh. It all comes of trying to be kind to heffalumps. And he got back into bed. But he couldn't sleep. The more he tried to sleep, the more he couldn't. He tried counting sheep, which is sometimes a good way of getting to sleep, and as that was no good, he tried counting heffalumps, and that was worse, because every heffalump that he counted was making straight for a pot of Pooh's honey and eating it all. For some minutes he lay there miserably, but when the 587th heffalump was licking its jaws and saying to itself, Very good honey, this. I don't know when I've tasted much better, Pooh could bear it no longer. He jumped out of bed, he ran out of the house, and he ran straight to the 6 pine trees. The sun was still in bed, but there was a lightness in the sky over the 100-acre wood, which seemed to show that it was waking up, and it would soon be kicking off its clothes. In the half-light, the pine trees looked cold and lonely, and the very deep pit seemed deeper than it was, and Pooh's jar of honey at the bottom was something mysterious, a shape no more. But as he got nearer to it, his nose told him that it was indeed honey, and his tongue came out and began to polish up his mouth, getting ready for it. Bother, said Pooh, as he got his nose inside the jar. A heffalump has been eating it. And then he thought a little and said, Oh, no, I did. I forgot. Indeed, he had eaten most of it, but there was a little left at the very bottom of the jar, and he pushed his head right in and began to lick. By and by, Piglet woke up, and as soon as he woke up, he said to himself, Oh, And then he said bravely, "Yes." And then still more bravely, "Quite so." But he didn't feel very brave, for the word which he was really jittering about in his brain was heffalumps. What was a heffalump like? Was it fierce? Did it come when you whistled? And how did it come? And was it fond of piglets at all? And if it was fond of piglets, did it make any difference what sort of piglet? Suppose it was fierce with piglets. Would it make any difference if the piglet had a grandfather called Trespassers William? He didn't know the answer to any of these questions, and he was going to see his first heffalump in about an hour from now. Of course Pooh would be with him, and it was much more friendly with two, but suppose heffalumps were very fierce with piglets and Pooh Bears. Wouldn't it be better to pretend that he had a headache and couldn't go to the 6 pine trees this morning? But then suppose it would be a very fine day, and there were no heffalump in the trap. Here he would be in bed all morning, simply wasting his time for nothing. What should he do? And then he had a clever idea. He would go up very quietly to the 6 pine trees now, peep very cautiously into the trap, and see if there was a heffalump there. And if it was there, he would head back to bed, and if there wasn't, he wouldn't. And so off he went. At first he thought there wouldn't be a heffalump in the trap, and then he thought that there would, and as he got nearer he was sure that there would, because he could hear heffalumping about it like anything. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear," said Piglet to himself, and he wanted to run away, but somehow, having got so near, he felt that he just had to see what a heffalump was like. So he crept to the side of the trap and looked in. And all this time, Winnie the Pooh had been trying to get the honey jar off of his head. The more he shook it, the more tightly it stuck. "Bother," he said, inside the jar, and "Oh, help!" and mostly, "Ow!" And he tried bumping it against things, and he couldn't see what he was bumping it against, and it didn't help him anyway. And he tried to climb out of the trap, but as he could see nothing but the jar, and not much of that, he couldn't find his way. So at last he lifted up his head, jar and all, and made a loud roaring noise of sadness and despair. And it was at that moment that Piglet looked down. "Help! Help!" cried Piglet. "A heffalump! A horrible heffalump!" And he scampered off as hard as he could, still crying out, "Help! Help! A horrible heffalump! Huff, huff, a horrible heffalump! Hole, hole, a horrible heffalump!" And he didn't stop crying and scampering until he got to Christopher Robin's house. "Whatever's the matter, Piglet?" said Christopher Robin, who was just getting up. "Huff!" said Piglet, breathing so hard that he could hardly speak. A heffalump." "Where?" "Up there," said Piglet, waving his paw. "What did it look like?" Like, it had the biggest head you ever saw, Christopher Robin. A great enormous thing, like nothing. A huge big, well, I don't know, like an enormous big nothing, like a jar." "Well," said Christopher Robin, putting on his shoes, "I shall go and look at it. Come on." Piglet wasn't afraid if he had Christopher Robin with him, so off they went. "I can't hear it, can you?" said Piglet anxiously as they got near. "I can hear something," said Christopher Robin. It was Pooh bumping his head against a tree root he had found. "There," said Piglet. "Isn't it awful?" And he held on tight to Christopher Robin's hand. Suddenly, Christopher Robin began to laugh, and he laughed, and he laughed, and he laughed. And while he was still laughing, crash went the heffalump's head against the tree root. Smash went the jar, and out came Pooh's head again. Then Piglet saw what a foolish piglet he had been, and he was so ashamed of himself that he ran straight off home and went to bed with a headache. But Christopher Robin and Pooh went to breakfast together. "Oh, Winnie the Pooh," said Christopher Robin, "how I do love you." "And so do I," said Pooh. Chapter 6. Eeyore has a birthday and gets 2 presents. Eeyore, the old gray donkey, stood by the side of the stream and looked at himself in the water. "Pathetic," he said. "That's what it is. Pathetic." He turned and walked slowly down the stream for 20 yards, splashed across it, and walked slowly back on the other side. Then he looked at himself in the water again. "As I thought," he said. "No better from this side. But nobody minds. Nobody cares. Pathetic. That's just what it is." There was a crackling noise in the bracken behind him, and out came Pooh. "Good morning, Eeyore," said Pooh. "Good morning, Pooh Bear," said Eeyore gloomily. "If it is a good morning," he said, "which I doubt." "Why, what's the matter?" "Nothing, Pooh Bear, nothing. We can't all, and some of us don't. That's all there is to it." "Can't all what?" said Pooh, rubbing his nose. "Gaiety, song and dance. Here we go round the mulberry bush." "Oh," said Pooh. He thought for a long time, and then asked, "What mulberry bush is that?" "Bonhomie," went on Eeyore gloomily. "French word meaning bonhomie," he explained. "I'm not complaining, but there it is." Pooh sat on a large stone and tried to think this out. It sounded to him like a riddle, and he was never much good at riddles, being a bear of very little brain, so he sang Coddleston Pie instead. "Coddleston, Coddleston, Coddleston Pie. A fly can't bird, but a bird can fly. Ask me a riddle, and I reply. Coddleston, Coddleston, Coddleston Pie." That was the first verse. When he had finished, Eeyore didn't actually say that he didn't like it, so Pooh very kindly sang the second verse to him. "Coddleston, Coddleston, Coddleston Pie. A fish can't whistle, and neither can I. Ask me a riddle, and I reply. Coddleston, Coddleston, Coddleston Pie." Eeyore still said nothing at all, so Pooh hummed the third verse quietly to himself. "Coddleston, Coddleston, Coddleston Pie. Why does a chicken? I don't know why. Ask me a riddle, and I reply. Coddleston, Coddleston, Coddleston Pie." "That's right," said Eeyore. "Sing, umpty tiddly umpty too. Here we go, gathering nuts in May. Enjoy yourself." "I am," said Pooh. "Some can," said Eeyore. "Why, what's the matter?" "Is anything the matter?" "You seem so sad, Eeyore." "Sad? Why should I be sad? It's my birthday, the happiest day of the year." "Your birthday?" said Pooh in great surprise. "Of course it is. Can't you see? Look at all the presents I've had." He waved a foot from side to side. "Look at the birthday cake. Candles and pink sugar." Pooh looked first to the right, and then to the left. "Presents?" said Pooh. "Birthday cake?" said Pooh. "Where?" "Can't you see them?" "No," said Pooh. "Neither can I," said Eeyore. "Joke," he explained. "Ha ha." Pooh scratched his head, being a little puzzled by all this. "But is it really your birthday?" he asked. "It is." "Oh, well, many happy returns of the day, Eeyore." "And many happy returns to you, Pooh Bear." "But it isn't my birthday." "No, it's mine." "But you said many happy returns." "Well, why not? You don't always want to be miserable on my birthday, do you?" "Oh, I see," said Pooh. "It's bad enough," said Eeyore, almost breaking down. "Being miserable, what, with no presents and no cake and no candles and no proper notice taking of me at all, but if everybody else is going to be miserable." This was too much for Pooh. "Stay there," he called to Eeyore, as he turned and hurried back to home as quick as he could, for he felt that he must get poor Eeyore a present of some sort at once, and he could always think of a proper one afterwards. Outside his house, he found Piglet jumping up and down, trying to reach the knocker. "Hello, Piglet," he said. "Hello, Pooh," said Piglet. "What are you trying to do?" "I was trying to reach the knocker," said Piglet. "I just came round." "Let me do it for you," said Pooh kindly. So he reached up and knocked at the door. "I've just seen Eeyore," he said, "and poor Eeyore is in a very sad condition because it's his birthday and no one has taken any notice of it. And he's very gloomy, you know what Eeyore is. And there he was, and what a long time whoever lives here is answering this door." And he knocked again. "But Pooh," said Piglet, "it's your own house." "Oh," said Pooh, "so it is. Well, let's go in." So in they went. The first thing Pooh did was go to the cupboard and see if he had a small jar of honey left, and he had, so he took it down. "I'm giving this to Eeyore," he explained, "as a present. What are you going to give?" "Couldn't I give it too?" said Piglet. "From both of us?" "No," said Pooh, "that would not be a good plan." "All right then, I'll give him a balloon. I've got one left from my party. I'll go and get it now, shall I?" "That, Piglet, is a very good idea. It is just what Eeyore seems to cheer him up. No one can be uncheered with a balloon." So off Piglet trotted, and in the other direction went Pooh with his jar of honey. It was a warm day, and he had a long way to go. He hadn't gone more than a halfway when a sort of funny feeling began to creep all over him. It was at the tip of his nose and trickled all through him and out the sole of his feet. It was just as if somebody inside him were saying, "Now then, Pooh, time for a little something." "Dear, dear," said Pooh, "I didn't know it was as late as that." So he sat down and took the jar off the top of his honey. "Luckily I brought this with me," he said. "Many a bear going out on a warm day like this would never have thought of bringing a little something with him." And he began to eat. "Now let me see," he said. "Where was I going? Ah, yes, Eeyore." He got up slowly. And then, suddenly he remembered he had eaten Eeyore's present. "Bother," said Pooh. "What shall I do? I must give him something." For a little while he couldn't think of anything. Then he thought, well, it's a very nice pot, even if there's no honey in it, and if I washed it clean and got somebody to write a happy birthday on it, Eeyore could keep things in it, which might be useful. So he was just passing the 100-acre wood, and he went inside to call on Owl, who lived there. "Good morning, Owl," he said. "Good morning, Pooh," said Owl. "Many happy returns of Eeyore's birthday," said Pooh. "Oh, is that what it is?" "What are you going to give him, Owl?" "What are you going to give him, Pooh?" "I'm going to give him a useful pot to keep things in, and I wanted to ask you—" "Is this it?" said Owl, taking it out of Pooh's paw. "Yes, and I wanted to ask you—" "Somebody has been keeping honey in it," said Owl. "You can keep anything in it," said Pooh earnestly. "It's very useful like that. And I wanted to ask you—" "You ought to write a happy birthday on it." "That is what I wanted to ask you," said Pooh, "because my spelling is wobbly. It's good spelling, but it wobbles, and the letters get in the wrong places. Would you write a happy birthday on it for me?" "It's a nice pot," said Owl, looking at it all around. "Couldn't I give it, too? From both of us?" "No," said Pooh. "That would not be a good plan. I'll just wash it first, and you can write on it." Well, he washed the pot out and dried it, while Owl licked the end of his pencil and wondered how to spell birthday. "Can you read, Pooh?" he asked a little anxiously. "There's a notice about knocking and ringing at my door, which Christopher Robin wrote. Can you read it?" "Christopher Robin told me what it said, and then I could." "Well, I'll tell you what this says," he said, "and then you'll be able to." So Owl wrote, And this is what he wrote. Hippy pappy, bith the bithididee. Pooh looked on admiringly. I'm just saying a happy birthday, said Owl carelessly. It's a nice long one, said Pooh, very much impressed by it. Well, actually, of course, I'm saying a very happy birthday with a love from Pooh. Naturally, it takes a good lot of pencil to say a thing like that. Oh, I see, said Pooh. While all this was happening, Piglet had gone back to his own house to get Eeyore's balloon. He held it very tightly against himself so that it shouldn't blow away, and he ran as fast as he could, so as to get to Eeyore's before Pooh did, for he thought that he would like to be the first one to give a present, just as if he had thought of it without being told by anybody. And running along and thinking how pleased Eeyore would be, he didn't look where he was going. And suddenly he put his foot in a rabbit hole and fell down on his face. Bang! Piglet lay there, wondering what had happened. At first, he thought that the whole world had blown up, and then he thought that perhaps only the forest part of it had, and then he thought that perhaps only he had, and he was now on the moon or somewhere, and he would never see Christopher Robin or Pooh or Eeyore again. And then he thought, well, even if I'm in the moon, I needn't be face downwards all the time. So he got cautiously up and looked about him. He was still in the forest. Well, that's funny, he thought. And I wonder what that bang was. I couldn't have made such a noise just falling down. And where's my balloon? And what's this small piece of damp rag doing? It was the balloon. Oh dear, said Piglet. Oh dearie, dear. Well, it's too late now. I can't go back. And I haven't another balloon, and perhaps Eeyore doesn't like balloons so very much. So he trotted on, rather sadly now, and down he came on the side of the stream where Eeyore was, and he called out to him. Good morning, Eeyore, shouted Piglet. Good morning, little Piglet, said Eeyore. If it is a good morning, he said, which I doubt. Not that it matters. Many happy returns of the day, said Piglet, having now gotten closer. Eeyore stopped looking at himself in the stream and turned to stare at Piglet. Just say that again, he said. Wait a moment. Bouncing on 3 legs, he began to bring his 4th leg very cautiously up to his ear. I did this yesterday, he explained, as he fell down for the 3rd time. It's quite easy. It's so I can hear better. There, that's done it. Now then, what were you saying? He pushed his ear forward with his hoof. Many happy returns of the day, said Piglet again. Meaning me? Of course, Eeyore. My birthday? Yes. Me? Having a real birthday? Yes, Eeyore, and I've brought you a present. Eeyore took his right hoof down from his right ear, turned round, and with great difficulty put up his left hoof. I must have that in the other ear, he said. Now then. A present, said Piglet very loudly. Meaning me again? Yes. My birthday still? Of course, Eeyore. Me going on having a real birthday? Yes, Eeyore, and I brought you a balloon. Balloon? Said Eeyore. Did you say balloon? One of those big colored things you blow up? Gaiety, song and dance, here we are and there we are. Yes, but I'm very sorry, Eeyore, but when I was running along to bring it to you, I fell down. Dear, how unlucky. You ran too fast, I expect. You didn't hurt yourself, little Piglet? No, but Oh, Eeyore, I burst the balloon. There was a very long silence. My balloon, said Eeyore at last. Piglet nodded. My birthday balloon? Yes, Eeyore, said Piglet, sniffing a little. Here it is, with many happy returns of the day. And he gave Eeyore that small piece of damp rag. This is it? Said Eeyore, a little surprised. Piglet nodded. My present? Piglet nodded again. The balloon? Yes. Thank you, Piglet, said Eeyore. You don't mind my asking, he went on, but what color was the balloon when it was a balloon? Red. I just wondered. Red, he murmured to himself. My favorite color. How big was it? About as big as me. I just wondered. About as big as Piglet, he said to himself sadly. My favorite size. Well, well. Piglet felt very miserable and didn't know what to say. He was still opening his mouth to begin something, and then decided it wasn't very good saying that, when he heard a shout from the other side of the river, and there was Pooh. Many happy returns of the day, called out Pooh, forgetting that he had said it already. Thank you, Pooh, I'm having them, said Eeyore gloomily. I've brought you a little present, said Pooh excitedly. I've had it, said Eeyore. Pooh had now splashed across the stream to Eeyore, and Piglet was sitting a little way off, his head in his paws, snuffling to himself. It's a useful pot, said Pooh. Here it is, and it's got a very happy birthday with love from Pooh written on it. That's all that writing, and it's for putting things in. There. When Eeyore saw the pot, he became quite excited. Why, he said, I believe my balloon will go into that pot. Oh no, Eeyore, said Pooh. Balloons are much too big to go into pots. What you do with a balloon is, you hold the balloon. Not mine, said Eeyore proudly. Look, Piglet. And as Piglet looked sorrowfully around, Eeyore picked the balloon up with his teeth and placed it carefully in the pot, picked it out and put it on the ground, and then picked it up again and put it carefully back. So it does, said Pooh. It goes in. So it does, said Piglet, and it comes out. Doesn't it? Said Eeyore. It goes in and out like anything. I'm very glad, said Pooh happily, and I thought of giving you a useful pot to put things in. I'm very glad, said Piglet happily, that I thought of giving you something to put in a useful pot. But Eeyore wasn't listening. He was taking the balloon out and putting it back again, as happy as could be. And didn't I give him anything? Asked Christopher Robin sadly. Of course you did, I said. You gave him, I don't remember, a little... I gave him a box of paints to paint things with. That was it. Why didn't I give it to him in the morning? You were so busy getting his party ready for him. He had a cake with icing on the top and 3 candles and his name in pink sugar. And yes, I remember, said Christopher Robin. Chapter 7. Kanga and Baby Roo come to the forest, and Piglet has a bath. Nobody seemed to know where they came from, but there they were in the forest, Kanga and Baby Roo. When Pooh asked Christopher Robin, how did they come here? Christopher Robin said, in the usual way, if you know what I mean, Pooh. And Pooh, who didn't, said, oh. Then he nodded his head twice and said, in the usual way, ah. Then he went on to call his friend Piglet to see what he thought about it. And at Piglet's house he found Rabbit, so they all talked about it together. What I don't like about it is this, said Rabbit. How are we, you, Pooh, and you, Piglet, and me, and suddenly, and Eeyore, said Pooh, and Eeyore, and then suddenly, and Owl, said Pooh, and Owl, and then all of a sudden, oh, and Eeyore, said Pooh, I was forgetting him. Here we are, said Rabbit, very slowly and carefully, all of us. And then suddenly, we wake up one morning, and what do we find? We find a strange animal among us. an animal of whom we have never even heard before. An animal who carries her family about in her pocket. Suppose I carried my family about with me in my pocket. How many pockets should I want? 16, said Piglet. 17, isn't it? Said Rabbit. And one more for a handkerchief. That's 18. 18 pockets in one suit. I haven't time. There was a long and thoughtful silence, and then Pooh, who had been frowning very hard for some minutes, said, I make it 15. What? Said Rabbit. 15. 15 what? Your family. What about them? Pooh rubbed his nose and said he thought Rabbit had been talking about his family. Did I? Said Rabbit carelessly. Yes, you did. Never mind, Pooh, said Piglet impatiently. The question is, what are we to do about Kanga? Oh, I see, said Pooh. The best way, said Rabbit, would be this. The best way would be to steal Baby Roo and hide him, and then when Kanga says, Where is Baby Roo? We say, Aha! Aha, said Pooh, practicing. Aha, aha. Of course, he went on, we could say aha even if we hadn't stolen Baby Roo. Pooh, said Rabbit kindly, you haven't any brain. We say aha so that Kanga knows we know where Baby Roo is. Aha means we'll tell you where Baby Roo is if you promise to go away from the forest and never come back. Now, don't talk while I think. Pooh went into a corner and tried saying aha in that sort of voice. Sometimes it seemed to him that it did mean what Rabbit said, and sometimes it seemed to him that it didn't. I suppose it's just practice, he thought. I wonder if Kanga will have to practice too so as to understand it. There's just one thing, said Piglet, fidgeting a bit. I was talking to Christopher Robin, and he said that a Kanga was generally regarded as one of the fiercer animals. I'm not frightened of fiercer animals in the ordinary way, but it is well known that if one of the fiercer animals is deprived of its young, it becomes as fierce as two of the fiercer animals, in which case, aha, is probably a foolish thing to say. Piglet, said Rabbit, taking out a pencil and licking the end of it, you haven't any pluck. It is hard to be brave, said Piglet, sniffling slightly, when you're only a very small animal. Rabbit, who had begun to write very busily, looked up and said, It is because you are a very small animal that you will be useful in the adventure before us. Piglet was so excited at the idea of being useful that he forgot to be frightened any more, and when Rabbit went on to say that Kanga was only fierce during winter months, being at other times of an affectionate nature, he could hardly sit still. He was so eager to begin being useful at once. What about me? Said Pooh sadly. I suppose I shan't be useful? Never mind, Pooh, said Piglet comfortingly. Another time, perhaps. Without Pooh, said Rabbit solemnly, as he sharpened his pencil, the adventure would be impossible. Oh, said Piglet, and tried not to look disappointed. But Pooh went into a corner of the room and said proudly to himself, Impossible without me. That sort of bear. Now listen all of you, said Rabbit, when he had finished writing, and Pooh and Piglet sat listening very eagerly with their mouths open. This is what Rabbit read out. Plan to capture Baby Roo. 1. General remarks. Kanga runs faster than any of us, even me. 2. More general remarks. Kanga never takes her eyes off Baby Roo, except when he's safely buttoned in her pocket. 3. Therefore, if we are to capture Baby Roo, we must get a long start, because Kanga runs faster than any of us, even me. See point number 1. Number 4, a thought. If Roo had jumped out of Kanga's pocket, and Piglet had jumped in, Kanga wouldn't know the difference, because Piglet is a very small animal. Number 5, like Roo. 6, but Kanga would have to be looking the other way first, so as not to see Piglet jumping in. 7. See point number 2. 8. Another thought, but if Pooh was talking to her very excitedly, she might look the other way for a moment. 9. And then I could run away with Roo. 10. Quickly. 11. And Kanga wouldn't discover the difference until afterwards. Well, Rabbit read it out proudly, and for a little while after he had read it, nobody said anything. And then Piglet, who had been opening and shutting his mouth without making any noise, managed to say very huskily, "And afterwards?" "How do you mean?" "When Kanga does discover the difference. Then we all say, 'Aha!'" "All 3 of us?" "Yes." "Oh. Why, what's the trouble, Piglet?" "Nothing," said Piglet, "as long as we all 3 say it." "As long as we all 3 say it," said Piglet, "I don't mind. But I shouldn't care to say 'aha' by myself. It wouldn't sound nearly so well." "By the way," he said, "you are quite sure about what you said about the winter months?" "The winter months?" "Yes, about being fierce only in the winter months." "Oh, yes, that's all right. Well, Pooh, you see what you have to do?" "No," said Pooh Bear, "not yet. What should I do?" "Well, you just have to talk very hard to Kanga so she doesn't notice anything." "Oh, what about?" "Anything you like." "You mean like telling her a little bit of poetry or something?" "That's it," said Rabbit. "Splendid. Now come along." So they all went out to look for Kanga. Kanga and Roo were spending a quiet afternoon in a sandy part of the forest. Baby Roo was practicing very small jumps in the sand and falling down mouse holes and climbing out of them, and Kanga was fidgeting about and saying, "Just one more jump, dear, and then we must go home." And at that moment, who should come stumping up the hill but Pooh. "Good afternoon, Kanga." "Good afternoon, Pooh." "Look at me jumping," squeaked Roo, and fell into another mouse hole. "Hello, Roo, my little fellow." "We were just going home," said Kanga. "Good afternoon, Rabbit. Good afternoon, Piglet." Rabbit and Piglet, who had now come up from the other side of the hill, said good afternoon, and "Hello, Roo," and Roo asked them to look at him jumping, so they stayed and looked. And Kanga looked too. "Oh, Kanga," said Pooh, after Rabbit had winked at him twice, "I didn't know if you were interested in poetry at all." "Hardly at all," said Kanga. "Oh," said Pooh. "Roo, dear, just one more jump and then we must go home." There was a short silence while Roo fell down another molehill. "Go on," said Rabbit in a loud whisper behind his paw. "Talking of poetry," said Pooh, "I made up a little piece as I was coming along. It went like this. Let me see. Fancy," said Kanga. "Now, Roo, dear, you'll like this piece of poetry," said Rabbit. "You'll love it," said Piglet. "You must listen very carefully," said Rabbit. "So as to not miss any of it," said Piglet. "Oh, yes," said Kanga, but she still looked at Baby Roo. "How did it go, Pooh?" said Rabbit. Pooh gave a little cough and began. Lines written by a bear of very little brain. On Monday, when the sun is hot, I wonder to myself a lot. Now is it true, or is it not, that what is which, and which is what? On Tuesday, when it hails and snows, the feeling on me grows and grows, that hardly anybody knows if those are these, or these are those. On Wednesday, when the sky is blue, and I have nothing else to do, I sometimes wonder if it's true that who is what, and what is who. On Tuesday, when it starts to freeze, and hoarfrost twinkles on the trees, how very steadily one sees that these are whose, but whose are these. On Friday, yes, it is, isn't it? Said Kanga. not wanting to hear what happened on Friday. "Just one more jump, Roo dear, and then we really must be going." Rabbit gave Pooh a hurrying up sort of nudge. "Talking of poetry," said Pooh quickly, "have you ever noticed that tree over there?" "Where?" said Kanga. "Now, Roo." "Right over there," said Pooh, pointing behind Kanga's back. "No," said Kanga. "Now jump in, Roo dear, and we'll go home." "You ought to look at that tree right over there," said Rabbit. "Shall I lift you in, Roo?" And he picked up Roo in his paws. "I can see a bird in it from here," said Pooh. "Or is it a fish?" "You ought to see that bird from here," said Rabbit, "unless it's a fish." "It isn't a fish, it's a bird," said Piglet. "So it is," said Rabbit. "Is it a starling or a blackbird?" said Pooh. "That's the whole question," said Rabbit. "Is it a blackbird or a starling?" And then at last Kanga did turn her head to look. And the moment that her head was turned, Rabbit said in a loud voice, "In you go, Roo." And in jumped Piglet into Kanga's pocket, and off scampered Rabbit, with Roo in his paws, as fast as he could. "Why, where's Rabbit?" said Kanga, turning round again. "Are you all right, Roo dear?" Piglet made a squeaky Roo noise from the bottom of Kanga's pocket. "Rabbit had to go away," said Pooh. "I think he thought of something he had to go see about it suddenly." "And Piglet?" "I think Piglet thought of something at the same time, suddenly." "Well, we must be getting home," said Kanga. "Goodbye, Pooh." And in 3 large jumps, she was gone. Pooh looked after her as she went. "I wish I could jump like that," he thought. "Some can and some can't. That's how it is." But there were moments when Piglet wished that Kanga couldn't. Often, when he had a long walk home to the forest, he had wished he were a bird, but now he thought jerkily to himself at the bottom of Kanga's pockets, "If this is flying, I shall never really take to it." And as he went up in the air, he said, "Ooh," and as he came down, he said, "Ow," and he was saying, "Ooh, ow, ooh, ow, ooh, ow," all the way to Kanga's house. Of course, as soon as Kanga unbuttoned her pocket, she saw what had happened. Just for a moment, she thought she was frightened, and then she knew she wasn't, for she felt quite sure that Christopher Robin would never let any harm happen to Roo. So she said to herself, "If they are having a joke with me, I shall have a joke with them." "Now then, Roo dear," she said, as she took Piglet out of her pocket. "Bedtime." "Aha!" said Piglet, as well as he could, after his terrifying journey. But it wasn't a very good aha, and Kanga didn't seem to understand what it meant. "Bath first," said Kanga in a cheerful voice. "Aha!" said Piglet again, looking around anxiously for the others. But the others weren't there. Rabbit was playing with Baby Roo in his own house, and feeling more fond of him every minute, and Pooh, who had decided to be a Kanga, was still at the sandy place on the top of the forest, practicing jumps. "I'm not at all sure," said Kanga in a thoughtful voice, "that it wouldn't be a good idea to have a cold bath this evening. Would you like that, Roo dear?" Piglet, who had never really been fond of baths, shuddered a long, indignant shudder, and said as brave a voice as he could, "Kanga, I see the time has come to speak plainly." "Funny little Roo," said Kanga, as she got the bath water ready. "I'm not Roo," said Piglet louder. "I am Piglet." "Yes, dear, yes," said Kanga soothingly, and imitating Piglet's voice too. "So clever of him," she went on, as she took a large bar of yellow soap out of the cupboard. "What will he be doing next?" "Can't you see?" shouted Piglet. "Haven't you got eyes? Look at me." "I am looking, Roo dear," said Kanga, rather severely. "And you know what I told you yesterday about making faces. If you go on making faces like Piglet's, you will grow up to look like Piglet. And then think how sorry you will be. Now then, into the bath, and don't let me have to spank you again, or speak to you about it." Before he knew where it was, Piglet was in the bath, and Kanga was scrubbing him firmly with a large, lathery flannel. "Ow!" cried Piglet. "Let me out! I'm Piglet!" "Don't open the mouth, dear, or the soap goes in," said Kanga. "There, what did I tell you?" You did it on purpose," spluttered Piglet, as soon as he could speak again, and then accidentally had another mouthful of lathery flannel. "That's right, dear, don't say anything," said Kanga, and in another minute Piglet was out of the bath and being rubbed dry with a towel. "Now," said Kanga, "there's your medicine, and then bed." What medicine?" said Piglet. "To make you grow big and strong, dear. You don't want to grow up small and weak like Piglet, do you? Well then." At that moment there was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Kanga, and in came Christopher Robin. "Christopher Robin, Christopher Robin," cried Piglet. "Tell Kanga who I am. She keeps saying I'm Roo. I'm not Roo, am I?" Christopher Robin looked at him very carefully and shook his head. "You can't be Roo," he said, "because I've just seen Roo playing in Rabbit's house." "Well," said Kanga, "fancy that. Fancy my making a mistake like that." "There you are," said Piglet. "I told you so. I'm Piglet." Christopher Robin shook his head again. "Oh, you're not Piglet," he said. "I know Piglet well, and he's quite a different color." Piglet began to say that this was because he had just had a bath, and then he thought that perhaps he wouldn't say that, and as he opened his mouth to say something else, Kanga slipped the medicine spoon in, and then patted him on the back and told him it was really quite a nice taste when you get used to it. "I knew it wasn't Piglet," said Kanga. "I wonder who it could be." "Perhaps it's some relation of Pooh's," said Christopher Robin. "What about a nephew or an uncle or something?" Kanga agreed that this was probably what it was, and said that they would all have to call it by some name. "I shall call it Poohtell," said Christopher Robin. "Henry Poohtell for short." And just when it was decided, Henry Poohtell wiggled out of Kanga's arms and jumped to the ground. To his great joy, Christopher Robin had left the door open. Never had Henry Poohtell Piglet run so fast as he ran then, and he didn't stop running until he had gone quite close to his house. But when he was 100 yards away, he stopped running and rolled the rest of the way home, so as to get its own nice comfortable color again. So Kanga and Roo stayed in the forest, and every Tuesday Roo spent the day with his great friend Rabbit, and every Tuesday Kanga spent the day with her great friend Pooh, teaching her how to jump, and every Tuesday Piglet spent the day with his great friend Christopher Robin. So they were all very happy again.